Hi there, thanks for joining me. In this video, I'll show you how to paint stencil style street art, kind of like you would see from an artist like Banksy. So, we're going to be doing this digitally, of course, not actually spray painting on anybody's walls here. So I'm going to hide the title and I'm going to kind of zoom in and you can see what I've accomplished here. What I've tried to do is I've tried to make it look like there's a wall with a bunch of texture, and then I've spray painted this stencil onto the wall using spray paint. And you can see there's some drips and some different things. I was kind of going for kind of a realistic interpretation of this. So I'll show you how to do that from the beginning. You're going to need a picture to start with. So the picture I'm using is just a black and white picture that I have. It's probably better that if it's black and white. If it's not black and white, I'll show you how you can make it black and white. So I'm just going to drag and drop an image into here, into Painter. It's kind of small right now. We want to make it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go to Canvas, Resize, and let's change it to 1200 by 1200 pixels. So now it's a little bit bigger. You just want something that's about as big as what you're going to want to work on here. So the next thing we need to do is make it into a stencil. You may have to play around with some of the light and contrast settings. You can do that under tonal control and brightness and contrast. And if you play with these settings, you might get some different results for the next step. So if this next step we do doesn't work out very well, you can come back in here and adjust some of this. The trick to getting a stencil cut out from your image is to turn it black and white first. So we'll go to tonal control and adjust colors, and then all you have to do is just take this saturation bar all the way to the left to take out all the saturation and color, and click OK. My image doesn't have any colors, so that's okay. And the next thing we're going to do is go to Effects, Tonal Control, Posterize. And then we'll take the levels down to 2. What that's going to do is that's automatically going to just make all the darkest areas black and all the lightest areas white, and it will only show white and black. So what I meant earlier by having to adjust your color and contrast, you might get some different results if you play around with that contrast setting. It may show or hide more of this. You can also do this in Photoshop too. We'll go for something like this, and then now what we want to do is we want to eliminate all of this white so that we just get to keep the black area. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a select all and edit cut and then edit paste in place. And what that's going to do is that's just going to take this artwork off of the canvas layer and put it on its own layer. We'll call it Stencil, so we know what it is. Now we're going to use the magic wand tool, which is right here. You'll want it to be set to 32 as I have it here. Same settings as I have up here. And then you just click on this white area and we'll hit delete. Now you won't be able to see anything yet because the background is white. So what we should do is we should change the background to a color that we can see. So let's do a select none to deselect the selection, or you could do Control D on your keyboard. We'll go back to the canvas layer. Let's fill that canvas layer with red using the paint bucket set to current color, and we'll just click on the canvas, and you can see in this area where we erased this white, we can now see through to the canvas, which is red. So our stencil is here and our canvas is this red background. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to erase all this white or cover it up with black, depending on what's easier. So we'll go back to the magic wand, back on the stencil layer, and I'm going to select more white and then hit delete. And I think that's probably good. The rest of this I'm just going to paint over with black. So I'm going to select black now. Make sure you get 100% black here. So make sure S and V, your saturation and your value are 0. If you're not seeing HSV for your color, you need to change it here in this little top right menu. And the brush I'm going to use is a Scratchboard Tool found in the pens category. Make sure it's set to 100% opacity. I'm going to just paint over these white areas because that's faster than trying to delete them with the paintbrush tool, for me at least. Maybe some little tiny specks here and there, so try to get everything. Don't worry about the white that's on the edges here. We'll take care of that in a minute. You can paint out anything that you don't really want to keep. So all this we can just fill in. Some of this we're going to remove eventually. So now the next thing that we'll do is we will turn on preserve transparency on this layer, and let's just paint over the whole thing. That's going to paint away any white edges that you might be seeing. I'll zoom in and you can see what I mean here. See these little white edges around all of the black? We're painting that away. Just make sure you paint over everything, get all those white edges. Using a big brush helps for that. Now we're looking good. We'll turn off preserve transparency, and now let's use the eraser to erase some of this stencil that we don't want. Make sure your eraser is set to hard mode. Make sure your opacity is set to 100. Anything we don't want, we will erase. Now, you need to be kind of careful. You don't want to erase too much. You don't really want to leave anything that you're not going to keep. So I'm going to just erase the neck, and then whatever this is part of the background here. And I'm going to have my bottom of my hairline there showing. Then my head kind of goes off the page here, so if I want to take this whole thing and move it over, I can just use my layer adjuster tool and take it and drag it. And there's some extra junk we need to get rid of and clean up with our eraser up here. And then I need to draw in the rest of my hair using the Scratchboard tool and black. So you can kind of get creative with this and add to the stencil besides just subtracting from it. Fix my hair, and then I think I want to put in this line here. So I'm trying to connect this part of the eyebrow to that part of the head. It helps if you look at your reference image to get a feel for what to do there. Do something like this for the nose. This is a shadow here, so we can erase this. This is just part of the background. And we'll erase more of this chin area here. Now, the important thing about a stencil is if this was going to be a real stencil that we were going to use to do some graffiti type art, you have to do it in such a way to where you don't have any little floating areas that are on their own. Like, what I mean by floating areas is these are kind of here on their own. So if we were to cut this black area out of paper, this black area would just be kind of floating on its own. It's not attached to any of the other black areas. So we need to make sure that everything is all contiguous and it all attaches to something else. So what we'll have to do here is we'll have to add a connector of some sort. We'll add something like that. It's making me look a little bit more angry, but that's okay. Do that with the eye. Go something like that. Go ahead and connect the chin here. And then here's an area, this ear is kind of floating, so we'll have to cut out some of this. Sideburn here. These two little pieces are floating, so we'll have to make them connect. So I'll just go ahead and do something like that to make them all connect. And anywhere else I see anything that needs to be cleaned up, I'm going to clean it up. I want to get rid of any details that are too small, because obviously you wouldn't want to cut those out of a stencil. Okay, so we got something like that. Now we can give it a test. So the best way to test if this is going to work or not is going to be with the paint bucket tool. So with the paint bucket tool selected, we'll use white and we'll just tap inside this area to see what happens. So if we're filling like this, but there's some missing areas, these areas that are still red, these are the areas where we need to erase some of the black so that the white can get through. So I'll do an undo. I'll take my eraser. I'm going to erase that little area there. And this area here, and then now watch what happens when we use the paint bucket. So I'm missing that little area there. I'll just fill that in with black as well. Try it one more time with white. Now we're looking good. So the last thing we have to do is we have to cut a little bit of this stencil here. And the way that we'll do that is we'll use the eraser. I'm just going to make a little modification there so that we don't have this whole piece as a floating area. So now ideally what we want is we want to be able to fill this canvas with white and have it fill up the face and the background while the black still remains, and then we'll have a perfect stencil. So there you go. Now we've got a stencil. We know that it's working. There's no remaining red background areas or anything that's messed up. There's no little floating islands or anything. And so we're looking good. So now we can put the canvas back to whatever color we want. Let's just make it a light gray. We've got our stencil, and we can start using it. So it would be good to maybe do a double layer to make a second stencil to where we can fill in the face. So the way that we'll do that is we'll just go ahead and make a new layer, put it below the stencil. Let's call it white stencil. Call the top one black stencil. On the white stencil layer, we'll use white, and we'll use the Scratchboard tool, and we'll just go ahead and just paint in this area here to fill this in. Use a smaller brush along the edges. And you can paint over the black because the black is on a layer above the white, so it's okay. You don't have to really worry about any of the edges except for the edges that are on the outside of your image here. And you can use a bigger brush to fill in the middle. You want to make sure that this is all one continuous shape here. So to do that, turn off the black stencil and just make sure that there aren't multiple little chunks of white here floating or anything. Make sure it's all one big lump. So we've got our white stencil, we've got our black stencil, and we can use it to start doing some spray painting. So the trick to this is we want to select this stencil and then use this selected area to paint on a separate layer. So the way we do that is we'll just hide this white stencil for now, and let's create a new layer, and let's call it black paint. So this will be our black paint that we're going to spray paint onto our wall. We will hide the black stencil layer, go to the black stencil layer and right click on it, or use the right click button on your pen and do select layer content. That's going to put a selection around that stencil. Now if we click on the black paint layer, that selection will move up with us to that black paint layer and allow us to paint within that stencil shape onto a new layer. So we can pick black, and we'll pick an airbrush that's called Fine Spray. Make sure your opacity is set to 100, put your spread at 17, turn your flow all the way up to the right, and put your feature at 1. And that'll give a pretty good spray paint effect. And then just go ahead and just start spray painting, and try to paint like you're holding a paint can. You know, you would go kind of side to side and you do kind of strokes back and forth. Don't fill in the whole thing. You want to leave some of the area kind of speckled like this. And if you want to hide this selection temporarily without deselecting it, you do Control-Shift-H on your keyboard, and you can continue to paint inside your selection without it going away. You can do Control-Shift-H to bring it back. And you have to watch out, because if this is hidden, you're not going to be able to paint outside of this selection until you deselect it, doing a Control D or doing a select none from the select menu. So we'll do that. I've deselected my selection. I want to make a new layer below my black paint and call it white paint. We'll do the same thing. We'll go to the white stencil layer, select it, right click on it, select layer content to get our selection. Go to the white paint layer, select white paint. We'll use our same airbrush and we'll just paint in the same way on our white stencil layer. We can do a Control D to deselect. You can see now we've got a stencil. So now if we change our background color to anything that we want, let's put some texture on it. Let's use the custom sponge and let's take a dark gray. You can use a pretty big sponge and let's paint on our background. Now you can see if we add maybe some color to our background, a little bit of our background shows through and it looks like our image has been spray painted on. So now the last thing that you can do to kind of make it look a little more realistic, I'm not going to show you everything that I did in that other example because I did a whole bunch of extra stuff to the background and we're not going to do that in this tutorial. But if you wanted to add some texture on top of everything, we can do that pretty easily. So we'll make a new layer, we'll call it texture. And the trick to this is you need a very specific color. You want to have your saturation at 0 and your value at 128. So you can just type that in, and your hue at 0 as well. With this gray color, use the paint bucket to just fill this texture layer, which needs to be on top of everything, with gray. And then we'll set the composite method up here to overlay. Overlay makes that particular gray color invisible, but it will allow us to use any lighter or darker colors on top of it and it'll show up. So basically we'll just be able to put this texture on top of everything on its own layer. The texture that will get used is going to depend on which paper you have selected in your papers panel. So if you go to Window, Paper Panels, you can get to your paper panels. And let's use this simulated wood grain paper first with these settings that I have here. Put paper scale all the way up and paper contrast somewhere around 124. And we'll go to Effects, Surface Control, Apply Surface Texture, and then we'll drag to pan this page to somewhere where we can maybe see some texture, like right here on the red. That texture looks good. You might want to play with your amount setting. You don't want it to be too strong like this. You want it to be a little more subtle. So you might have to lower it. Don't play with any of the other settings and then go to OK. Now you can see if we zoom in, we've got a really nice texture over everything, and it makes it look kind of like a wall. Then you can add multiple layers of texture if you want to change your paper again, and let's say change it to Artist Rough Paper. We can do another layer, Surface Control, Apply Surface Texture, go to OK. Now we've got another texture. Now this is a bit too strong, so we can back it down a little bit by changing the opacity until we get something that we want. That looks pretty good. It looks like a wall. What I did on the other painting is I added some layers of shadows and different things to kind of make it look like it was actually on a wall. So I did like a multiply layer and took a dark blue and painted in a shadow area that kind of goes over it a little bit. And then I put some stains on the wall the same way using a multiply layer. And then I also, on another layer, drew in some cracks and different things just using the Detail Oils brush. I just drew in some little cracks like so to make it look like a wall, even some cracks that kind of come over the top of the piece. You could even use white in the dark areas to draw in some different cracks and things. And that'll make it look more like it's been painted onto a wall. And then the last thing I did to kind of give it a little bit of flavor is I put a tag over it. I made it look like somebody spray painted over my artwork with a spray can. So I'm going to use that same fine spray brush. I made a new layer. Let's call it Tag. So that's what it's called when those people spray paint on your fence. They tag your fence. And I don't condone tagging or defacing people's property. I don't personally do graffiti art, and I look down on artists who do deface people's property. I don't think it's very cool. But that's just my personal take on it. But otherwise, painting digitally with spray paint is fine with me, or if you're doing it on your own personal property or someone commissioned you to do it, that's fine. But don't spray paint on other people's stuff like I'm about to do here. So we'll pick a color. Let's pick a blue, and we can just spray paint something over it. Let's maybe not do it right on the top. And if you find that color is not the exact kind of color that you want, you can turn on Preserve Transparency, take the Scratchboard tool and paint over it with another color. And something like that I think is fine. So that gives you an idea of how you can do some stencil style graffiti art. If you found this information helpful, take a quick second to like this video or share it on YouTube or Facebook. And that'll make it easier for other artists out there to find this information. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for my next video.